I'm Dr. Sarah Olivo.
And I'm Dr. Liz Seidler, and you're listening to College is Fine, Everything's Fine.
All right, so we're really excited to have one of my old friends from the Child Study Center join me. This is Dr. Yamalis Dias, and I will let her introduce herself.
Sure. Well, I'm a child and adolescent psychologist at the NYU Child Study Center in the Department of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry. And I've actually been there. I just had, I think, my 12-year anniversary. And just for fun, because I'll be sharing this for a while, just celebrated my 20-year, what I'm calling my ADHD anniversary, after finding the very first set of notes I ever took about ADHD during a call with my academic advisor. And I can see in the notes that I'm definitely first learning about ADHD. That's when I think the love for specializing in children and families who have ADHD sort of started.
That is the cutest story.
Thank you. It was a nice little nostalgic moment of nostalgia for sure.
Yeah. Is that like a wooden anniversary, a silver anniversary? Like, what is the 20-year anniversary?
Oh, that's a good question. I should have gifted myself something, although I guess the gift is specializing in ADHD and getting a chance to be so fulfilled in what I do. Maybe that's what the gift was.
Yeah. Yamalis, I'm going to look it up and I'm going to give you a gift.
Once I find out, I'm going to remind myself, like, you should give yourself silver. You should give yourself gold. Oh. Yeah, I don't know what it is. 25.
I know. Well, Liz, you ask the next question. I'm going to Google it.
Okay.
Perfect.
Okay. So I think in the zeitgeist, a lot of people know what ADHD is. Some of our listeners may have been diagnosed with it. Other people might identify with some of the symptoms related to ADHD. And we definitely are not here to diagnose anyone. But what are some of the myths out there about ADHD that you think might be helpful to debunk?
I think probably one of the myths that I always try to debunk is that ADHD has to do with intelligence or intellectual ability, and it really just does not. And I want to sort of clarify, problems with attention can certainly impact your ability to take in new information, to retain that information, and to produce information, right? Like actually get your work done. And so I guess as far as that's concerned, it probably does impact the outcome of your intellectual sort of output. But as a starting point, I think I hear parents, teenagers, young adults who are diagnosed with ADHD really start to fret about what that means about their learning potential. And so I like to separate out and make sure people really understand that your intellectual potential and the way in which attention can maybe impact that are two different things, right? And so we like to identify in what way, very specifically, does the attention deficit get in the way of your intellectual potential? You have the intellect, you have it, and now we just need to make sure to clear the path for it, and that's where we think about inattention. So I like to sort of clarify right up front that ADHD and not being smart those two things are not related. So that's one of the ones that sort of hurts my heart when I hear it. I think the other one that I often see is that there's a sort of a negative narrative that kids and people with ADHD develop about themselves, and a lot of that negative narrative comes from the negative feedback that they receive from a very early age all the way through their development about their behavior, about things that might be frustrating or annoying or too much, too loud, whatever it might be. And eventually there's this very sort of negative narrative that they have about themselves. And so I suppose it might not necessarily be a myth because it is in fact their experience of the way that they get that negative feedback. But I'm sort of on a mission to debunk the negative narrative, right? That if you pay very careful attention to what it is people are telling you, there may be some behaviors that need to be worked on, but it doesn't make you a bad person, and you fill in the terms that people use. It can be anything from stupid, lazy, too much, too intense, annoying, frustrating. I mean, all of the words that they use. And eventually that's some of the conversation that they have with themselves, which really also breaks my heart. So I think those are probably the top two that I want to start with. There's so many, but those are the two that I think bother me the most.
And speaking as someone on this podcast who might struggle a little bit with ADHD, I'd like to come back to the topic of the 20-year anniversary, which is
Please do.
China.
Oh,
China.
so I owe
You need to
myself
get yourself
China.
some China. Yeah.
It's such a meaningful anniversary. I'll gift myself something in a really lovely porcelain. Okay, thank you for that.
No problem. But I did want to say that, one word, and actually our friend and colleague, Dr. Tim Verdine, was the one who said this to me. He said, deficit's sort of a misnomer, right? We say attention deficit, but it's actually a kind of a mismatch of attention. Can you talk a bit more about that?
Sure. Well, look, one of the things we know about ADHD is that a big component of it is not having enough dopamine in the brain. And at a very basic level, dopamine is the neurochemical in the brain that really helps with attention, focus, motivation, interest, if you will. And so it sort of locks your brain into things that are interesting or stimulating. And it also helps you to determine what to attend to and what not to attend to, right? How to basically leave out the things that are extra noise and how to focus in on what's important right in front of you. So, when people don't understand ADHD, they're sort of leaving out how much your brain does for you automatically. The ADHD brain doesn't do that as automatically, and it's basically, some of it at least is related to the dopamine being too low. And so to come back to your question, why is the word deficit a misnomer? The word deficit is a misnomer because it isn't just about not being able to pay attention. It's about not being able to direct your attention and to maintain your attention in the direction it really needs to be going in. So when you finally do, for example, start doing something that you need to get done, your brain almost has like a bunch of open doors that people are just walking through, right? It's like having too many tabs open and your brain doesn't know how to close the other tabs in order to focus on just the one tab. So maybe that's actually a sort of better way to think about it. We all know that too many tabs across the bottom of the screen, right? You could be going between a bunch of things, but never getting any one of them done. And so not being able to direct your attention to the task that you need to be focusing on is one piece of it. But then the real misnomer comes in with the hyperfocus of ADHD, right? Where once the brain gets locked and loaded on some particular task at hand, and it really activates those dopamine pathways, it's almost like the ADHD brain does not know how to get out. And so it's like they've crawled into some space now the external world almost can't penetrate. And that can be really useful, by the way. Who doesn't love a good hyperfocus episode where you feel so productive? But at the same time, if you can't be brought out of that because you have to move on to something else, you really actually don't have the time to be hyperfocusing on this one small thing, then that can also be problematic, right? So at the end of the day, the attention deficit, quote unquote, misnomer is in the fact that it isn't just that you cannot pay attention. It's that you can't direct your attention either when you need to be avoiding distractions or when you're in hyperfocus mode and can't get yourself out of that.
All right, we were talking about dopamine, and we know from research, blah, 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 that kids or teens or young adults with ADHD oftentimes struggle with certain things like video game addiction and so on and so forth. So again, we're not going to say that everyone who has ADHD struggles with that, but with those dopamine hits that they're looking for, talk a bit about things like video games, scrolling on social media, things that you feel like could be potentially extra difficult for people to get distracted by in college.
Sure. Well, look, we know that video games and social media were designed, at least in part, to activate some of those dopamine pathways that kind of get you intrigued by what you're doing and what you're watching. And then, of course, they have built-in features that additionally activate dopamine, right? Whether it be liking things or being able to repost or being able to buy things in a video game. All of those kinds of details, at least in part, activate dopamine. And so the reason this is important for anybody to understand is even without ADHD, your brain is susceptible to kind of getting really hooked because it gives you a little dopamine buzz. And the more you do it, the more you get that little buzz. For the ADHD brain, this is a particular concern because naturally the ADHD brain does not have enough dopamine. So it's almost like dopamine hungry all the time. And all of these kinds of things like video games and social media are like dopamine food, Well, if you're always hungry, then when you finally find your food source, that's where you're going to be sort of spending time. That's where you're going to get that dopamine. And so we know that the ADHD brain is at least a little more susceptible to spending more time, to becoming more intense about it, and to really kind of hyper-focusing in on some of those platforms, specifically because it activates the dopamine pathway and gets them really intrigued, really interested, and just locks them in. If we really think about it, if you spend your day feeling like your brain is a little more scattered, you can't quite find things as interesting, and then you finally find something that kind of gets you really interested, you're going to want to do that thing more. And so the warning is very simple. Monitor your own susceptibility to, how much time you're spending, to whether or not you can get off of it when you should be. And most importantly, what is it keeping you from doing? What else should you be doing when you are spending time on video games and social media? It's neither one of those are all bad. They actually contribute and add a lot of value to our social experience in today's world. So it's not about bashing either one of those things. It's just about helping people recognize how they can self-manage a little bit more effectively, and to be very aware once it crosses the line into actual addiction or interfering with your functioning. If you're spending 4 to 6 to 8 hours on it, that's 4 to 6 to 8 hours that you certainly could have been doing other things. And that's something to watch, definitely something to monitor.
I like that you mentioned that you're missing out on other things, because I think when I'm working with college students, a lot of times if I say, okay, what would you like to be doing instead? Like if we were to fill your day, what are some things you'd like to do? Very rarely would someone say to me, I'd like to spend 6 hours a day on video games. They would say, okay, I know I need to study for this, but I really want to maybe take a walk, or I want to do this activity, or see this friend, have a coffee, or, listen, sometimes they've said, I'm burnt out. I just kind of need a day to lay low. But rarely do people say, I'd really just only want to spend my time doing this, doing in front of this screen or this device. And so to be able to say, what would you want to be doing instead, and sort of pack your day around those things and fill it in with the other type of downtime can be easier than just saying, hey, don't do this.
Right. Right.
So that's huge advice.
Just circling back to some things you said earlier, when you were debunking the myths, I tend to find that individuals who have ADHD really internalize some of these beliefs. They aren't achieving certain outcomes academically, so then they jump to this conclusion that they're not capable of doing it, or I'm annoying, like I engage in these behaviors sometimes, therefore like it's a personality trait, like it's never going to change, right? Or that they're less socially desirable in some way. So I'm glad you brought those up, because I'm constantly trying to work on some of these negative beliefs. What are some of the strengths of individuals that have ADHD, or kind of cool things that you notice about how their brains work?
I did just want to mention that I had really such an interesting and wonderful experience being part of a documentary called The Disruptors, which is streaming on most platforms. I would highly recommend your listeners watch this amazing documentary about ADHD. I think the producers and the filmmakers really did such a great job highlighting some of the challenges, of course, that come with ADHD, but really one of the things that I think they did that's so unique is they interviewed celebrities who have ADHD, as well as families and clinicians who work with people with ADHD. And what they did with the celebrities in particular was to really ask them how ADHD had actually led to some of the strengths and some of the success that they have. And so it really does a nice job of highlighting some of the superpowers and some of the strengths that come with ADHD. And I don't like for those to get overlooked or lost, because I think they can be leveraged in a really important way. So I'd highly recommend watching it. It's called The Disruptors. I'm a small part of it, but I eagerly and excitedly suggest watching it. And look, that hyper-focus state can be very useful if they learn, I always describe it as, becoming the driver and not the passenger. And if you're the passenger, then ADHD is driving. ADHD is going to stay in the passenger seat, but you should be the driver. And so identifying the ways in which ADHD kind of takes over the wheel and tries to drive you off course, and then very strategically learning how to take the wheel back. So for example, in hyperfocus mode, ADHD just hopped in the driver's seat and it's like, I'm going to have you focus on this really little thing. And then you as the real driver should be able to say, yes, I do want to go down that path. We really need to work on that. Or no, this is not the time for that. And then developing some really good strategies for writing it down on a list, like having a board of things to come back to, or whatever strategy you use to take the wheel back, right? So hyperfocus can be a strength. It can really lead to some very, very good products when you finally attend to something that really stimulates your brain. Problem solving, the uniqueness and the interest of the way that they approach problem solving can be really fascinating to watch. I love watching it unfold in kids just in my office. And sometimes the parents will look at me and go, that doesn't even make any sense. And I'm like, well, now just wait a second. Let's back up a sec and let's have this little guy or this, girl tell us exactly what it was that they were thinking. And you can always see that I go into this mode where I'm like, we're about to prove you wrong, mom or dad. You just watch your child's brain work. Because I already know that when I ask the child to describe their problem solving backwards, like their actual thought process, which we don't necessarily always get to see because they're pretty impulsive. So it looks like it doesn't have a thought process. And so when you can ask them to reverse it and tell me exactly how you got to that conclusion, the detail and the little nuances that they put together in their solution is fascinating too. It's almost like you can watch their brain like moving. So problem solving, they tend to be, believe it or not, for as much as we talk about having low frustration tolerance, in children, we definitely see this kind of low frustration tolerance tendency where everything sort of overwhelms them and they give up and can get really easily frustrated. But as they get a little bit older, and certainly in young adults and adults with ADHD, one of the things we tend to see is like a tenacity and a resilience. And in part, that is because by virtue of having ADHD, they've always had to work a little harder to do all the things. You can name the task, name the area of life, and I'll tell you the ways in which that's probably been a little bit harder. And yet, here they are, successful, happy, well-rounded, friends, relationships. So when we see those outcomes playing out, what you can trace back very clearly is a sense of like doggedness, resilience, tenacity. They just get after it. They're like a dog with a bone, and they just make it happen somehow. So those are probably, I could go on. Some of the other ones are like sense of humor. They tend to be creative. One of my favorite things to watch in my office is another thing that I love to see is that they tend to have what I call the engineering architecture brains. If I had a study to do, I probably would go and check in to see how many architects and engineers have traits of ADHD. Because the ADHD brain tends to be a architectural kind of engineering type of brain where the way that they can construct and create things physically, like with Legos, magnetiles, magnets, you give them, I have seen kids create things with paper, tape, and a pair of scissors. And they're like, do you have this? Do you have that? And then things that they create, the structures that they create are fascinating. And this is just my observation of I don't understand how their brains even work, but it's fascinating to see. And you can almost see when their brain kind of gets locked in and they start to move their little fingers and they're doing all of this stuff. And you can see that what's happening is that not only is their brain locked in to this really great strength, but they are in fact creating amazing things. So there are some very real strengths to this brain. Again, you just need to learn how to be the driver.
Liz knows I love a metaphor, and you've given us the tab metaphor, the driver metaphor. Okay, so we have these people who, probably have a lot of different ways in which they become a college student who was struggling with inattention or so on. Once they are in college, what are some of the things you see?
Oh gosh, I think the very first thing that I always worry about with young adults who are entering college and have ADHD, first and foremost, if they don't know they have ADHD, that is going to be a really tough go because they have no idea that without the extra scaffolding and supports of their parents and high school teachers and whatever other things were happening before they got to college, that all of that scaffolding comes apart and then they're really going to struggle to kind of manage the multiple demands, the time, the projects, staying on top of the reading when you have, quizzes and all of the things are just very tough. But certainly even when they do know they have ADHD, managing the downtime And, really it's all about managing time at the outset. But I think one of the things that hurts them is the fact that the structure is so open. It's like a big open field of time. And they're like, oh, this is going to be such an easy schedule. I have 2 classes on Monday and 1 class on Tuesday. And they just think they're going to have plenty of time to do it all. And the next thing you know, they are just falling apart. And in part, it's because they don't know how to manage their downtime. And the downtime becomes very open-ended, very loose. They don't know how to structure it for themselves, which is one of the natural sort of difficulties that the ADHD brain struggles with. It doesn't have a sort of natural ability to organize time in a linear, sort of structured, organized way. So the more open the time, I call it having no edges, right? So it's like the day has no edges. And so it's like one big open space. And they just don't know how to make sense of that. So one of the things we know is that the ADHD brain does best on a routine with structure, which means that the day needs edges. And when they first get to college, that's all up to them to figure out. It's no longer like follow this schedule that goes from 8 to 4, plus you have an after-school activity or a sport, so you're not going to be home until 5:30. Then you're going to have dinner, you're going to do your homework, and you're going to go to bed. Amazing. That's your schedule. In college, it's all the things, as we know. So managing downtime along with managing the academic workload. And then one last thing, which you sprinkle on top, is, where they look for their dopamine hits is going to be with their social time. That's where the ADHD brain thrives, when it finds sources of dopamine. And you know where they're going to find the sources of dopamine? Hanging out with friends, socializing, going to programs and groups and whatever they're interested in. So that's where their brain's going to naturally want to gravitate. And then when they have to sit down to do the boring thing that does not naturally generate dopamine, again, they struggle. So you sprinkle on top the social time and the fact that they're free to do technically whatever they want. And we really see the young adults with ADHD really begin to struggle in their freshman and sophomore year in particular. And hopefully by middle of sophomore year, they have gotten supports. They've figured it out. They've learned how to add edges to their day and created the structure for themselves. And they're sort of in a rhythm. And then we can sort of see them begin to thrive.
We talk to a lot of college students who say, in fact, we just did it on one of our Instagram posts, like, what is more stressful for you? Too much downtime or too much to do? And we hear from students, even whether they have ADHD or not, we don't ask, but a lot of them say that's a struggle to even for a typical kind of to go from high school, which is so structured, and it just kind of builds over time, right? So by the time you get to college, at least I was like, I need a break, but without those edges, it can be really tough. I think for anyone.
I was going to say, most teenagers are overscheduled, right? And a lot of their schedule is handed to them and constructed by the environments in which they're in. I always say to college students, regardless if they have ADHD, your biggest struggle is not having enough time. It's going to be managing your time effectively. You're going to have too much time. But, we're hoping to air this episode soon. And because I think some of the things you're talking about will help students as they enter into exams. And what I find for ADHD individuals is writing tends to be incredibly challenging. And I think a lot of college students are not really prepared in general for how much writing is involved. Yeah. But for college students who struggle with organization, planning, are impulsive in terms of making a wise choice about going to an end of the year party versus, planning for those end of the year projects, what are some things that you might share with them?
I think the biggest issue that they run into is that they tend to approach the task as a whole. And you guys know this, right? It'll be like, I have a paper to write. Okay? I have to sit down and write that paper. And already you have tricked your brain into, number one, getting overwhelmed, and number two, not knowing where to start. And so this is a perfect example of identify exactly how the ADHD is getting in the way and plug in a strategy to make sure that you can address the ADHD. The ADHD brain, when you give it a big chunk of something, is going to be like, this is too much. And then the natural tendency is going to be to move away from it. Well, this is a lot. I'll write it later. Oh, this is too much. I don't have time for this right now. Okay, but if you operate in what I call chicken nugget sizes, right? Don't eat the whole meal. one big bite at a time. Just break it down into chicken nuggets. Okay, so we know that one of the best things that students can do is take a big task and identify first and foremost, well, what would be the first thing I need to do? Well, if you have to write a paper, you have to identify what topic you want to work on. That might actually take you a couple of Google searches or a checking in with your professor to see what viable topic you could write on. Or if you do have a prompt, really asking yourself, okay, what is this topic all about? Okay, so topic. And then you're going to have at least a few sessions of quote unquote research, where you're actually just researching the topic or starting to pull together content. And so just by taking I have to write a paper for this class and asking yourself, what's the first step? Okay, then what's the second, third, and fourth step? Is it like a couple of sessions of research? All right, let me plug in an hour of research for this paper on Monday, an hour of research for this paper on Tuesday, and then again on Friday. So once you start breaking it down to those pieces, then you actually take those and plug them into your work calendar. When are you going to do those things? The better way to do this is to ask yourself, how long do I have for that particular step? And so now you've identified the step, the amount of time you have for it, and exactly where it goes on your calendar. And so if you break it down that way, we know how much better that will be. But oftentimes the ADHD brain in particular has a very hard time not only breaking it down, but then sticking to a little schedule that isn't like the night before. And so to that point, I also just want to debunk the myth that I hear from so many college students and really everybody. I work best under pressure, and I'm going to do better if I just wait until the last minute. Oh, my love
think that's I know. College students with ADHD, me, grad students.
So many people. And the truth is,
anxious students.
It's actually, the reason I like to highlight this is because actually, you're not entirely wrong. It's just not a good model. And the reason they're not entirely wrong is because the truth of the matter is that if they're working on something that is now, I call it being on fire, it is now on fire. Okay, it's hot. It's due tomorrow. Two important things are going to happen. Number one, your dopamine is going to activate at full throttle. Okay, your brain is going to shoot you some really nice dopamine to get you started because now you're panicked. And what's going to follow the dopamine is going to be a nice little surge of adrenaline. And you are going to your brain is going to be ready to fire. So
your body's pumping.
You are sitting at the computer. You're typing faster than usual. Your thoughts are flying. You feel like you are doing some good work. Amazing. Now, so you're not entirely wrong. Will you get it done? Yes. Is it easier to get it done this way than maybe it was a week ago when you were feeling a little ho-hum about it and you needed to kind of drum up your own dopamine? Probably also yes. So I see how they get convinced of this. But what I try to teach my college students is that the reason this is not a good idea is because in addition to the fact that adrenaline in the brain, a little bit of it goes a long way. But too much of it actually starts to shut down some of your language areas, your processing, et cetera. And so you're really actually not probably going to produce the best work because you're just jamming together ideas. But number two, we know what happens post one of those surges, which is that your brain and body start to shut down. And they're like, I need a break. That was, I just hulked out. That was too much. I need to rest now. Well, if you have 3 papers, 2 exams, a project that you need to get, plus you're working and you have all of these other things going on, one paper working on it the night before like that is just going to burn you out. You're going to use up all of your good energy when actually you need to spread that love out. So I get it, why they feel that way, but it's actually not a healthy way. And usually, by the way, the product that you get at the end, look, some students are able to bang it out, and I think they get reinforced because they're like, and I got an A. Ha. Right, and you know what? Again, God bless you. I get it, but I do also want to point out that it's not the healthiest way to learn to work. And it's also not going to be healthy for you, in your actual work, where it isn't, just like a project at a time. It's like you have to learn to be more steady. So my last plug for that is to tell, and I tell my patients this all the time. I'm like, you have to find your natural dopamine sources And instead of just waiting around for the dopamine to strike, you have to learn to activate your own dopamine, right? And so that can be anything from, does your brain naturally respond with a little dopamine as soon as you turn on music? Is it right after you've worked out and taken a great shower and then you sit down and you immediately start working? Learn where you just took a few sips of dopamine and use that strategically to get yourself activated instead of just waiting around for the dopamine to be like, I'm here. This task is on fire. You should do this now. It's like, find your own dopamine, create it, and then create these little strategies that help you to get started on tasks that you really don't feel like starting on. So I think the learning how to manage, again, we're talking about driving. Maybe the dopamine is like the gas. It's like, how do you gas up? You can't just wait to find the nearest, gas pump and hope it has, you just need to learn how to gas up your own car.
I think that could probably be true for a lot of different things. We always talk about motivation is a little overrated. I'm sure dopamine hits can be a little overrated from that perspective. But I can also imagine that it's reinforcing, yes, and it can work. But when it doesn't work, there is no safety net.
Yeah.
There's nothing to kind of catch you. And the other thing I also notice with college students, and that sometimes this will help too, is I'm like, when you get those dopamine hits and all that adrenaline and cortisol, that actually can kind of get your immune system and buffer against other things coming up. But guess what happens the minute you're done is that suddenly you get all the kind of sickness and the germs that your body is fighting off. And then it's time to party and you can't because you got pneumonia. You can't because you're sick. You
can't even enjoy the fruits of your labor. It's like, you know what I want you to be able to do once you finish that paper? I want you to be able to go and socialize. I want you to go to the party if that's what you want to go to. If you and your friends are going to do something really fun. But now all of a sudden, if you've just basically fried your brain and your body is fatigued, and in fact you've impacted your immune functioning and you're now sick and you're not feeling so hot, and then you don't go to those things or don't get to enjoy them, you're basically just creating less opportunity to really be reinforced for all of your efforts, right? And so that can be really tough. But Sarah, you also mentioned that the safety net isn't there. And so I think for my young people with ADHD, I think the other thing I think is so important for them to realize is that you have to figure out how to create your best product, because unfortunately the experience that they often report is that they put in a lot of effort for very little payout, and that the outcome never seems to match their level of effort. And so one of the things I point out is, well, if you stay up all night and you worked what you believe to be so hard on a paper or studying for an exam, and then you don't get such a great grade, you're going to assume that it's because you weren't able to do it, when in fact you put in what felt like a lot of effort, but it wasn't strategic, effective effort. And so you're going to keep getting this negative feedback loop where you're putting in all this effort and you're not getting the outcome that you're looking for. And I'm trying to help you understand that it's because of the way you started the task. Mm-hmm. If you just backed up a little and really started to learn how to drive the car effectively, this beautiful Maserati that you've got, this very fast, well-built car, if you just learn how to drive it and use its brakes effectively, then you're going to be able to do so much more than if you basically, get in it, floor the gas pedal, and usually crash. I can really riff on this metaphor for quite some time.
Oh my gosh.
And by the way, in my mind, I was like, what about go ahead.
No, I'm going to be using this Thursday at 4:15. I already know who I'm going to be talking about this with.
Perfect.
And I'm also thinking, for me, it's more of a Bronco convertible, Maserati, fine, but everyone can have a different kind of car.
Yes, whatever your model of amazing car is. And actually earlier when we were talking about sort of this creating structure and the edges of the day, I sometimes tell kids especially, well, first we need a roadmap, right? You can't go off-roading, because when you go off-roading, you end up, in a ditch somewhere. So we need guardrails, and we need to be on the street that is paved, and we need to plug the directions into our navigation system. Okay, that's a good routine. You can just follow the directions instead of always having to turn all over the place, making all of these wrong turns, and you end up in the wrong location. So the car and the riffing on that metaphor, it's not new, it's not unique to me. I think I just I push it a little far with my metaphors.
Well, I do too. And I think once you find a good one,
It works.
Thank you so much for coming on. This has been wonderful.
It really has been so fun to catch up with you.
Same. It's so nice to see you. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, really. It's been a pleasure.
Miss you around the water cooler. Hopefully we'll see each other in person
Hopefully
soon.
another water cooler eventually.
Thank you to our guests for sharing their stories and their advice. This podcast is for college students, and we want input by college students, so please reach out by text, email, or voice memo to collegesfinepodcast@gmail.com or 929-500-2231. Tell us your story, give us tips on topics you'd like to hear, or give us feedback about an episode.
Follow us on TikTok and Instagram at College is Fine Podcast for episode announcements and resources. And last but not least, if you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to the podcast. Every hit of that plus button helps us keep going.